Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV and Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are sharing with you some thoughts that I think are absolutely incredible. All right? All of it is focused around the concept and the idea of the challenge of Christ. Remember, Jesus said, John chapter 10, verse 37, "If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." Now, as I pointed out repeatedly on this program, that challenge of Christ is very distinctive. Other world religions do not offer that kind of a challenge. They just as soon you not look into the gritty details, the historicity, the validity, the provability of those religions. Some of them get quite hostile if you dare to challenge the historicity of their religion. But Christ is very forthright. Christ pulled no punches. If I don't do what I say I'm going to do, if I do not do what the Father gave me to do, then don't believe me. Just dismiss me. And it's absolutely remarkable to me. Down through the years, I have encountered any number of people when I have shared with them the challenge of Christ, they literally did not know that challenge exists in the Bible. And it's disturbing to me, I must be candid, that far, far too many Christians are they're just outright with it. I'm not concerned about proving whether or not Jesus is true. He lives in my heart. Well, listen, that sounds very emotive. It sounds very sincere, and I'm sure they are sincere. But insofar as the Bible is concerned, the Bible is a book based upon evidence. The Bible is not a book that says, oh, go pray for God to give you a sign that it's not true. Which, by the way, is a ridiculous challenge. Which means if you don't get a sign, then it must mean that it's true. You see the issue? You see the problem? If you don't get a sign, that proves it's true. And it's guaranteed you're not going to get a sign. Therefore, this or that must be true. Yeah, that's stacking the deck. So anyway, I have been sharing with you how pivotal and critical the book of Revelation is. How pivotal, how crucial the challenge of Christ is in regard to the book of Revelation. Now, let me just say this very simply, very straightforwardly. If when we come to the book of Revelation, if it can be demonstrated, which is what I've been doing, if it can be demonstrated that all of the time words in the book of Revelation are to be taken objectively, to speak of true, genuine, objective, temporal imminence, temporal nearness, then that means all futurist eschatologies are false. Because it means God can tell time. It means that no matter what our concepts of the book of Revelation might be, they were supposed to be fulfilled imminently, soon, quickly, and shortly, as man determines at hand, quickly, shortly, and soon. God doesn't have one vocabulary of time for the way that he talks and thinks, and then have another vocabulary of time that man thinks in, and never the two come together. No. That's really quite ridiculous. Why is it that people only make that claim about time and about God's statements about time? Well, it's because they have preconceived ideas about the nature of the things that God said were about to take place. And because their concept of the nature of those things was not fulfilled quickly, soon, shortly, then they tell us, see, that just proves God can't tell time, or it just proves that God doesn't communicate truthfully in regard to time. Now, over the last 2 weeks, I've shared with you an absolutely incredible text, and that's Luke chapter 21 and verse 8. Now, I'm going to go back over the territory by way of rehearsal to drive home how important this text is. And listen, I've got to tell you, I have never read in any commentary. You know, I've got a Logos Platinum Bible study program. And I've gone to Luke chapter 21 and verse 8 there. I've gone through that, down through the entire list of my commentaries. I haven't found one single commentator. Now, maybe I missed something, right? There's always that possibility. Maybe I was distracted, maybe, whatever. Maybe I missed a commentator who saw the power of Jesus' words in light of the epistolary statements about the coming of the Lord, and brought those two concepts together as I have done. Not one commentator. Now, does that prove that I'm really, really, really smart? No, I'm really quite simple, to be honest about it. But you know what? When I see things that are so obvious, when I see that here's what Jesus said, and here's what the apostles said, and that there appears to be a conflict unless we have a solution, then I look for that solution. And I think I found it. So, in Luke chapter 21 and verse 8, now remember, I'm going back over the territory we covered last week because it's so critical, because it is so important. Jesus said, "Be not deceived. Many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the time has drawn near. Do not believe them." Now, here's what that means, really simply. This means, and he was speaking to his apostles, 4 of his apostles, and he was telling them, okay, guys, listen, there are going to be some false teachers come. Number 1, they're going to claim to be me. Number 2, those false teachers are going to say, the time has drawn near. Number 3, Jesus said, don't go after them. Do not believe them. Now, I shared with you last week, I was in a conversation with one individual, and I brought up this text, and their response was, well, you see, the message, the time is drawn near, is not what Jesus condemned. What was being condemned was, they're going to claim to be Jesus. So I responded by saying, so in other words, what you're telling me is, as long as somebody doesn't claim to be Jesus, it's okay if they make false predictions about the imminence of the end. Well, that ended that conversation. That individual, I think he heard his mama calling or something like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus did not restrict his warning to those who would claim to be him. He included their message. their message was, or was going to be, the end has drawn near. Jesus, therefore, absolutely, explicitly, emphatically, irrefutably condemned making premature declarations of the nearness of the end. Now, folks, let's look at a little bit of history. In the 2nd century, a, quote, prophet, unquote, arose claiming to be the prophet of God. Claiming to be, as a matter of fact, the Paraclete, the Comforter. And he predicted that the New Jerusalem, which he said was a literal, physical city, was going to descend out of heaven in his generation. Now, he was thoroughly condemned by the Christians of the day, but not before gaining a considerable following. Even the patristic writer of Tertullian, I believe it's Tertullian, was very attracted to him and to his movement. So, Tertullian, 2nd century, said, the end, the time has drawn near. That was 2,000 years ago. He made a premature, false prediction of the end. He's a false prophet. Now listen to me very carefully. In every single century, we could be so bold as to say, in every generation since then, false prophets have arisen and said, this is it. This is the generation. The time has drawn near. For 2,000 years, this has been going on. All you got to read, one author by the name of Gummerlock has written a book on the false prophets who predicted the end of the world. In the year 1000, a major movement began with the prediction the coming of the Lord was going to come at the turn of the millennium. That's what it had to happen. The end had drawn near. Well, didn't happen. In the 19th century, in the 1800s, William Miller came on the scene and said, the Lord is coming in 1844. Mark it down. The end is drawn near. Without fail, the Lord is coming. The end is at hand. And all over the country, all over the United States, people dressed in white robes, they gave their farms away, they gave their goods away, and on the appointed day, they climbed up into trees. They climbed up on the top of barns. Nothing happened. So William Miller was supposedly, according to the reports, just absolutely devastated. So he recalculated, set the date for 1845. But he had fewer followers by then. Nothing happened. Ellen G. White, who was one of his more dedicated followers, trying to retrieve the movement, stepped forward and said, let me tell you something, folks. The Lord has spoken to me. The Lord has revealed to me that he purposely led William Miller astray to test the faith of the faithful. And oh, by the way, she said, you need to follow me. And so out of that movement, developed the Seventh-day Adventist movement, who for many, 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 many years would predict that the coming of the Lord has drawn near. Then you have the Millennial Dawn folks, also known as Jehovah's Witnesses in our day. I have a book in my library written by the leader of the Millennial Dawn movement, as it was known at the time. This book predicted, quote, "Millions now living will never die." Because he predicted the Lord was going to come in 1917, 1918, 1919, 1925. And you know, for many, many years, Jehovah's Witnesses would hit the used bookstores. I had used bookstore dealers tell me that Jehovah's Witnesses would very often come into their stores looking for that book, and he would ask them, "What are you going to do with it?" "Oh, we're going to burn it." Yeah, destroy the evidence. Destroy the evidence. I think by now you're getting the point. You remember Edgar Whisenant, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture will be in 1988. Oops. Rewrite, recalculate. 89 Reasons Why the Lord will come in 1989. Oops. Edgar Whisenant took his millions of dollars and disappeared from the scene, reportedly devastated. Oh, then we have Hal Lindsey, don't we? 1980s countdown to Armageddon. On and on and on. And about this point, you know, about this time, an atheist or an agnostic might step forward and say, "Preston, you've entrapped yourself. You've just destroyed the Christian religion." And you may be saying, "Well, why would they say that?" Because the atheists would say, "Okay, look, Preston, you just pointed out how the Montanists failed. You just pointed out that in every single generation, in every century, you've had people saying falsely, the end is drawing near. They've been proven to be making, quote, premature, unquote, declarations of the end. They just flat made false predictions." And Preston, let's not forget, Jesus made the same prediction, that he was coming back on the clouds of glory in judgment of all men in the kingdom before that generation died. Hey, Preston, he didn't do it. So Jesus's own warnings against false teachers making premature declarations of the end applies to Jesus himself. Yeah, that's what atheists argue. And of course, as I shared with you last week, here is Jesus warning against making premature declarations of the end. But he said, in response to the apostles' questions about signs, about a sign of the end of the age, Jesus gave two signs, actually, two specific signs. This gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all the world as a witness to the nations, then comes the end. So the completion of the world mission was to be a sign of the end. By the way, those false teachers that Jesus warned about would say, the end, telos, has drawn near. Jesus said, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the telos. So here we have Jesus giving a sign of the end of the age. And he tells his apostles, learn the parable of the fig tree. When the fig tree puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise you, when you see these things come to pass, know that it, that's the end, that's the telos, know that it is nigh, from the Greek word ingus, even at the door. Now, I hope you'll go back and watch the video in which I went across James, the book of James, James chapter 5 particularly. I'm not going to repeat that, but please do that. Go back and rehearse that. So Jesus said, point number one, false teachers are going to come saying, the end, the telos, has drawn near, using the perfect tense of ingus, which is the Greek word engeken. Telos, engeken. Jesus said, don't believe them, but here's some signs of the end. When the gospel has been preached into all the world as a witness to the nations, then comes the end. Okay, watch this. Paul, in Romans 16, 25 and 26, said the gospel had been made known to all of the nations. In Romans 10, 18 and following, he said the gospel had been preached into all the world. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 5 to 7, that same apostle said the gospel had been preached into all of the cosmos, the world, and was bringing forth fruit. In Colossians 1 and verse 23, that same apostle said the gospel had been preached to every creature, Greek word katissis, under heaven. Now, listen, folks, don't make the mistake of imposing a modern cosmology onto Paul's words or onto Jesus's words. Paul was not saying the gospel had been preached in America. Paul was not saying the gospel, in spite of the Mormon claims, by the way, Paul was not saying the gospel had been preached in South America. When Jesus said this gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all of the world, it's the Greek word oikoumene. Oikoumene is the inhabited world, the known inhabited world. In Paul's days, that was the Roman Empire. We dare not impose our modern cosmology onto Jesus's words or onto Paul's words. We must allow them to speak in the words, terms, phrases, and ideas of their world, of their vocabulary. And contrary to some, that doesn't take the Bible away from us. It gives us the Bible because it confirms fulfillment. So, Jesus said, false teachers going to come saying, the end is drawn near. Do not believe them. But here's a sign of the end. The gospel will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. When James was written, the book of James, the gospel had been preached into all the world. When 1 Peter was written, it was written at a time after which, or after Paul had said, the gospel has been preached into all the world. Jesus said, when you see these signs, then know it, the end, the telos, is near, even at the door. Now, last week, I shared with you 1 Peter chapter 4. Peter said that Christ was, when he wrote, 63, 64 AD, ready, Greek word hitoimos, which means not only morally prepared, but temporally ready to judge the living and the dead. That's the resurrection. Peter was affirming in the clearest words possible, Christ was ready to bring the resurrection. Point number 2, Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 7, the end, telos. What were the false prophets going to say? Oh, the telos has drawn near. Or excuse me, they said the kairos. We'll get to that, okay? But Jesus said, when the gospel has been preached into all the world as a witness to the nations, then comes the telos. Here is Peter saying, oh, and by the way, Peter affirmed in 1 Peter chapter 5, 9 and 10, that the gospel was known in all the world. And here he is affirming in chapter 4, verse 7, the telos of all things has drawn near. Folks, listen to me. Jesus said, do not believe premature declarations that the end has drawn near. Here is Peter writing a little over 30 years after Jesus gave that warning, saying the end has drawn near. Now, we've got a choice to make here. And once again, the atheist, the agnostic, the unbeliever is going to say, see, Peter is one of those very false prophets. Jesus was just simply deluded. He was a lunatic. Well, the point of fact is, Jesus said, don't believe anybody who says prematurely the end has drawn near, the time has drawn near. And here's Peter saying the end has drawn near. So, ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention, if Peter was saying, as the atheist claims, as the agnostic claims, as the Jews, and as most of Christianity says, if Peter was saying that the end of time had drawn near, he was a false prophet. If Peter was claiming that the end of the Christian age had drawn near, he was a false prophet. He became one of the very false prophets that Jesus warned him. Peter was on the mountain. Peter heard Jesus' warnings about making premature declarations. He also heard Jesus say, when you see the sign, know that the end is near. That's when you can say the end is near. Peter said the gospel had been preached. The end was near. Well, my end has come. See you next week.